remember, Dee, it's just a job.
So I'm Joel Burgess. I'm the studio head at Soft Drains and creative director of Ambrosia Sky.
So give us a quick elevator pitch of what Ambrosia Sky is all about.
Yeah, so Ambrosia Sky is an immersive first-person science fiction clean 'em up.
Clean them up. That's interesting. That's an interesting pitch. So because you do have a lot of water physics in this game. Talk about that.
Yeah, so the character's primary tool fundamentally is a chemical sprayer. So in the game, you're dealing with this fungal contaminant that's overtaken this space community, and you're going to use that to carve through these masses of fungus that volumetrically fill things out. So yeah, fundamentally, we have this cleaning mechanic, but then we layer in a bunch of other systems and story on top of that.
So what were some inspirations when you were creating the design of this fungus cleaning system?
I mean, we started really with the team and what we had worked on and what lessons we wanted to pull from that, areas that we wanted to continue exploring. And then we just thought about the games that we wanted to be in conversation with. So things that, are in that sort of cleaning and jobs in space and all these interesting new character fantasy mechanics that players showing a lot of interest in. Feels super fresh and modern for us in terms of just its game design. But we also want to be in conversation with this legacy of classic first person exploration immersive games, and we looked for a way to combine those two things into something new that we wanted to make.
You also have a really cool traversal mechanic with, I'm going to call it grappling instead of the other thing I want to call it so you don't get in trouble, but you have this cool grappling mechanic.
Yeah. I mean, we really wanted to have a sense of mobility for the player. And so we have the tether tool that Dahlia can use, and you can use that to grab and throw objects and to kind of move yourself around. But then we combine that with the low gravity and the ability to really move quickly. It changes the whole pace and flow and tone of the game. And then we find a way to put that into players' hands to let them be in control of how they want to explore and locomote and just get around the world.
You're talking about is it difficult doing the water mechanics because there was a lot of real time growth and spreading of these fungus that I was doing. Is it difficult to achieve that in a game?
Yeah, I mean, you're really dealing with a couple of different systems there, right? You've got the sprayer itself and the effects of that and how we do the physics of those sprays, right? And those projectile pieces. But then you've got the fungus itself. And so with the fungus, we use our own systems there as well as stuff from Houdini and Unreal to be able to grow these shapes. And then we use those networks of shapes in real time at runtime in the game to be able to have the fungus respond to what you're doing in anticipation of what you're doing and a response to how you're cleaning it, just to make the whole world feel active and alive and blur that line between environment and enemy.
Now, in the vertical slice we played today, we were looking for a specific body because our job is to kind of retain data from their death. Talk about what's going on in the story in this world, and your job is you're kind of like a janitor, but also a data retriever.
Yeah, I mean, so Dahlia is a part of this group called the Scarabs, and they're these mortuary scientists in space. So it's this job that is in equal parts this very rigorous scientific thing about going in and dealing with bodies and hygiene and cleaning, and it sort of serves those themes of the game. But it's also in equal part this very tender and intimate thing where you're doing this final act of service and care for the body of someone who's passed on. So it really stitches the narrative and the gameplay mechanics together, because you're going to be going through moment for moment using your cleaning and dealing with this very active threat. But then you'll be, tasked to find these people who have passed on, and you get to connect with them and learn about how they thought about their world and their death through the lens of these consents that they give for their body to be sampled as part of that project.
Kind of makes you come to grips with your own mortality, or just your mortality in general, the human race.
Sooner or later, it comes for us all, and we start thinking about the time that we have left and how we want to be thought of and what we're going to leave behind. And it does this incredible amount of heavy lifting to just get a few words from any of us when you're really put on the spot to talk about your death and what you're going to leave behind. So if you think about if you haven't done your will, do your will, right? But that's a conversation that really forces some tough stuff that people don't typically want to think about or confront. So with this game, we've created an environment that invites that conversation between characters in the world and the players and themselves.
Now, in terms of scale, is this kind of a Metroidvania type of game, or are you going to have specific levels that you enter into and kind of puzzle your way to the ending?
Yeah, so the game itself is level based, so you're being presented with different levels that you can go into and different types of objectives and gameplay implied by those objectives that you can go after. Not strictly linear though, so you're going to hit narrative gates in the game, but then the player will have choice of what levels they want to go to, and the ability to then kind of that Metroidvania thing, bring powers and just even lessons the player has learned as a person back to levels that you've played before to get a little bit more out of those environments.
Yeah, you really seem to spend a lot of time on interacting with the environments, that they're not just something to look at or like pass through. What went into like designing that? Like we opened a door by chaining together my electrical fungus to a other electrical fungus and chaining that electricity into the door.
Yeah, look, we love systems-based games, right? So for us, like, if we can simulate the right systems in the world, then we can create a situation where like the player can go what if, and the game can say yes to that, right? So it can lead to these situations that like when you want to create a cinematic moment, it's much harder to do that with this kind of game than when you're like just scripting. But when the player wants to create a cinematic moment, these games make that possible in a way that is not possible if you're not creating an environment that does have that ability to like call and respond to like you've used electricity or there's fire here or you've interacted in this way.
You've worked on a lot of big AAA, like multi-million dollar and now billion-dollar franchises. What's it like going on the other end and doing something smaller, indie or even AAA?
Yeah, I mean, my career has taken me through big teams and small teams and all kinds of different projects. I've found that, you know, the stuff that I've enjoyed working on the most has been environments where like, and I've been using this phrase when I talk about things is like, I want to invite everyone who works on this project to push their fingers into the clay to the point where like they'll be able to see their individual fingerprints on it. And I think being like a smaller team working on a new IP, it gives us the opportunity to create an environment where like that can be true. And it's much harder to do that, you know, something that's super established in a, you know, in a structure or a larger team where like you just can't create that space and opportunity to like be collaborating, like really collaborating with everybody on the team. So that part I've always really enjoyed. Whether, you know, I've worked on AAA teams that you would consider small, where I've seen that dynamic. I've worked on indie teams where you see the dynamic, and that's a lot of what we're chasing here at Soft Drains. It's just like a creative studio.
Now you have the water mechanics, you have the tether mechanics, you also have a zero gravity mechanics. How does that play when you're designing a level? Because that's a lot of ways to play, a lot of tools in your toolbox, essentially.
Yeah, chaotically. Yeah, I've never been a big proponent of sort of like the find the fun approach to things. I like to be a little bit more like, you know, rigorous than that.
You're right, yeah.
But you know what? With systems-based games, there is like a big element of that. Like what I love and what is difficult about these kinds of games is it is just like, it is a honey trap for the kinds of designers that like want to sit and like really like intellectualize about like how these systems work and what kind of like emergent affordances are we like, you know, giving players like for their agency and mastery and all these things that like we love to talk about after like GDC or whatever, right? But none of it works until like first contact with the enemy, or, you know, like that old saying, right? So it really drives you to not over intellectualize, to like get something on screen, play it as proof, and then just watch how all of your like well-constructed intellectual like theories just like shatter, right? So like it drives you, because it's a death loop if you don't, right? It drives you towards like rapid implementation and rapid experimentation to prove those theories out, because that is when you see like the opportunity to create good moments avail themselves. Like the electrical system, you know, is a thing that like we have had like the bones of it working. Like, so there's a really cool resource simulation that we do under the hood, but then figuring out how to like, hey, what parts of that simulation are actually manifesting for the player? What parts are actually like kind of like so under the hood, they're just like not purposeful, and then figuring out like, hey, we should simplify the system in this way is the right answer sometimes. And it's like, no, actually we should work harder to expose the system to the player is the right answer other times. And like, that is just, that's the play of the work, right? It's like, get it in an engine, get it on screen, try it out, and then go back to the drawing board and like get to the finish line as few as those loops as you can.
Now, is that harder to do when you have just your internal dev team and not like an early access or even like a large Q&A team?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like, I've seen teams that like do tons and tons of research and tons of sentiment testing. I've seen teams that have almost like a hostile feeling towards it and like really don't want to do it at all. And you know, I find like there's a good truth somewhere in the middle. You know, we've done friends and family play tests. We've put this game in front of like, you know, peers and designers that we really respect to get their opinions. We play the game as a team, you know, every Friday, and we gather that feedback and process it. But you know, like we just put the demo on Steam, and we are, you know, hopefully getting lots and lots of eyeballs on the game that way. And I think it's just going to be like an opportunity for us to receive a deluge of the kinds of the input that will be a great surrogate for a team like ours for those larger apparatuses that we, you know, might have if we were a big internal studios, you know, project team or something like that.
Just curious, because your game has a nice slow pace to it where you're figuring stuff out and kind of looking around. Did you ever consider doing it in VR when it was in its previous state?
Yeah. We've thought about working this game into VR, and I'd say it's not something that we've ruled out entirely. In fact, there are people on our team who were really instrumental in like coming up with this project who've done like really really important and sometimes like land-breaking VR type of work. So I think there's a lot of like opportunities for what this game systems are to work in that setting. So yeah, it's certainly like not something that we're focused on doing right now, but not something I would rule out at all.
Yeah. What's a big misconception from an outsider, like a consumer that looks at game dev as no idea how? What's a big misconception just in game development in 2025? Do you think?
I feel like the thing that game developers always want to say to this, and I don't think it's like untrue, right, is like how much more complicated games are to make than you think. I think there's a truth to that, but I actually think that is it's a misconception that I think we have about players. I think players actually do really appreciate how complicated games are to make, and I think game players have gotten like really sophisticated, right, about like understanding the systems. I think about what games like Minecraft have done. It was not a given when we were kids that you knew what like a pixel was, or like binary logic, right?
What's rigging? What's modeling? What's texturing? What's a 3D map? Like, we didn't know what that stuff was. It wasn't, the internet was very young, and we did not have those resources.
Yeah, we had to learn that stuff. Like even just like learning how to like 3D model like would require access to like a $20,000 like SGI like.
You had to rent, people out there watching, you had to rent suites to do something specific in a game, and it was thousands of dollars an hour, and you only got it for 4 hours. You had to do it and get out, right? That's what they had to do. Sorry.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah, it's just like the accessibility, right, of like even being able to learn was just so far. Like that has fundamentally changed, right? The accessibility to create has changed. The prominence of our art form in like mass media, like mainstream culture has changed, and like kids in kindergarten understand intuitively a voxel, right?
Yes.
Like voxels were a pretty exotic idea for like a kindergarten. Yeah. I mean,
People like them. Oh my god, I could do all that. I could go down. I could bury a thing. I could go up, go down. I could do anything. Yeah.
And like I remember like I think Delta Force 2 in like 1997 or something like had voxel grass. So when you zoomed in the sniper rifle, it was like incredible technology. And
Deep Rock Galactic did it, and then I think EverQuest Next, when that was a thing in its prototype. Sorry, I've been doing this for a long time, folks. So yeah, we both have. So.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing. I think our relationship with our own audience is that, yes, games are really hard to make, and I think they're harder to make than players realize, but maybe not in the ways that we think they think that they think, So yeah, I think the misconception is like this mutual thing about like players understanding the complexities of how games and tech work, being able to sort of like see the matrix of how games and game engines work, and then, for us to like really appreciate and respect that sophistication that our players do in fact have. And then, I think that's honestly like with the period that we're in right now with like risk aversion and what that's doing for like smaller teams and new IP and stuff like that is like really creating a situation where developers feel forced down a funnel to make a game for an audience which is actually not the player, right? And I think that it's a hazardous path for a lot of teams to feel like they're forced down that funnel, which is why I hope we're doing the right thing by making something that like isn't trying to just like embrace like the buzzwords and the sort of the check boxes of like what's required, because I think our audience is sophisticated and can understand what we're trying to do, and I think there's an audience for this kind of game, and I'm betting we're right.
So when did your game come out, and what platforms are you aiming for at launch?
Not talking about any of that today. Sorry, man.
Where can they go to find out more information about your game and the demo?
Yeah, so I'd say the first place to point people will be go check out Steam, because we've got the store page up, so like please throw us a wish list. We love it. And then check out the demo, right? So get hands-on with it. We'd love to get people's impressions, let that inform some of the decisions that we want to make going forward, get the feedback on that game. So yeah.